Hello, everybody. Our first virtual office hours in May, more specifically May the 3rd, 2023. We didn't get to have the psoas muscle workshop last week. That's the price of living in Costa Rica sometimes, Janina. But Janina will be running it for you the next week. So nothing is lost. All is well. It will take place at this time instead of the virtual office hours. And then you'll have another one this month as well. But that's first one, the psoas. And speaking of the psoas muscle, and the reason why we included these well-being workshops in the main GTR training too, as we said, it was so that we could get you on the self-help train as soon as possible before you even get into the graduate club, where that's a monthly event. And I wanted to use a little bit of time today to check in with you how you are all doing with the self-care, because we started talking about self-care back in January. I think it was our first call in 2023, and then we went on for several weeks going through the different parts of the deep care playbook, the foundations and the blueprint and the planning and all that. So if you have some thoughts that you would like to share, this would be a good place to do that today. Before I get to that, I would like to just mention a question that came up this week, and it's something that comes up often. So I'll just comment on that, and then we can share with the practitioner self-care and how you've been doing with that. So one of the things that comes up relatively often as a question is the question of sharing personal stories with the client. And do I share? Do I not share? How much is appropriate? Because many of you understand the power of sharing and the healing power of sharing. Even these virtual office hours, we all feel the healing power of sitting in the circle and sharing everybody's experiences and our lives really with each other. And sometimes there's the instinct that you want to give some of that same of healing to the client. Having said that, it's not the same dynamic as here in the circle that we have together every week. And whenever you're sharing personal stories with them, be aware of the potential downsides of it. And I'll go quickly through some of them just so I highlight them for you. And again, if you have something that you would like to share in that regard, we can do it as well. First of all, you are not obligated to share personal stories with your clients. That's always something to do only if you are comfortable with that. Having said that, the main rule to keep in mind with sharing is do share when you feel there is a therapeutic or healing benefit in your sharing for the client. Or in other words, if your sharing is an intervention to help them in some way. And to help them in some way can happen in several shapes. So for example, you might want to deepen your rapport. That's an intervention. Or you might want to make them feel more comfortable, not feeling like the experience that they're going through or the thoughts that they're having are weird or unacceptable, or that you would be judging them for it. That's another way of using personal stories. I often also like to use personal stories as a bridge towards an intervention or a process that I know that I'm heading towards with the client. I remember in the session with Angelica, for example, she shares with me that she's thinking of breaking up with her current boyfriend because there's no future. He's emotionally unavailable. She knows that she will never be with him in the long run. I think he was married or something like that. And she says that it's always such a difficult situation to be in a relationship and never being completely open to the other person, to have the permission to feel fully. And so I share a personal story that had to do with my father, but I used it as a bridge to get her to a place where she would be okay sharing whatever it was that was going on for her and talking about that. Perhaps a good way of making sure that those personal stories that you share really take that condition of they're there for the benefit of the client is when you share, do include something verbally that puts the client back on track. So for example, let's say I shared a personal story of mine, I could say, and I'm wondering if you're going through something similar or if you had a different experience in that. Or I'm wondering if it's the same for you, or what it makes you feel when I say what I just said. So that's a good way to make sure that the personal story doesn't just stay on you sharing a personal story, but it puts them back on track. You always want to redirect. Now, when it comes to the potential downsides of sharing personal stories, the biggest one potentially is that the focus goes from the client to you. And that is not an ideal place for a session. And so if that happens, it really should be temporary and there should be that purpose to it. You share the story and then the focus goes back to the client, just the way I said, perhaps with a question. I'm wondering if you went through something similar or if my experience is similar in any way to yours. Another potential downside is that with the more empathetic clients, they will start having empathy for you sometimes. And the whole dynamic of the relationship can change. I've seen this many times in my years of teaching, where almost the client becomes the coach or the mentor and the supporter, just because their natural empathy kicks in. So that's another downfall. Another one is also with certain life situations or topics that are potentially controversial in how people think about them. So for example, the topic of abortions. Let's just say that your client shared with you that they did have an abortion and it was a difficult decision for them. It's something that's still with them, not in a good way. And let's say you want to make them feel okay with that. And let's say you share that you also had an abortion at one point or another in your life. Now, even if you're doing it with a good intention, sorry, Taryn, I'm going to mute you just for a second. Or if you can do it, that would be perhaps, there you are. Okay, so even if you were potentially doing that with the intention of letting the client know it's okay, it's something that I'm not judging. I went through the same. What can potentially happen is perhaps that client is having an inner conflict with that. They did it, but it's against their beliefs. And they may unconsciously end up transferring that onto you. So now you almost become that representation of what one should not do, or how one should not end life, etc. So you don't want that. And sometimes it's difficult to know where the client stands with that. If you do know or sense in some way that it would be good for them if you shared it with them and you are okay sharing something personal like that, then do it. Just know that the danger of transference is something that is not that uncommon. It is almost like perhaps you've had that experience too, when a client comes to you and they have a difficult relationship with somebody. They might even be in an abusive relationship with somebody, or a person that's really treating them unkindly, and it might be, say, their parent. It could potentially be your instinct to have your clients back and to sort of have their side and be on their side in a way. But again, what can end up happening is usually the people who do stay in abusive relationships long-term, or relationships that are unkind or not quite what we would perceive as being nice, there is a reason why they're in that relationship. Perhaps they still like love that person. Perhaps they have their own beliefs of how leaving them would be unkind, or the, not neighborly thing to do, not loving thing to do. So again, that transference can happen even if you have the best intention of letting your client know that you have their back. So that's where that neutrality is always the best. And kind of using questions to figure out where the client is at and what their needs are, and going to personal stories perhaps when you are relatively or reasonably certain that that will land well. Also realize that your client does not have a confidentiality commitment towards you. So we should keep things confidential, whatever they share, but they don't make the same commitment to you. So if in some scenario they put on their social media account how they have had a session with you, and they put on something personal you shared, that's also something to keep in mind. And I'm not saying that this happens often, but it is something that can happen. So if you do share something personal, just know there's this. Okay. So right now I'll go to you, and you can either comment on what I've been talking about just now with the personal stories, or if you want to let us know how your self-care has been going, that would be wonderful. And if you could raise your hand, that would be very good as well. Maureen, I'm coming to you. You should be able to unmute yourself. There you are.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
I'm in a program called Virtual Coach, and they have gym sessions. So the people in that do gym sessions, practice coaching. And I also reached out to a fella, like a few people for coaching, and because I'm trying to find clients. And so he is being coached by me, but one of his issues is he wants to get more clients himself. He's a health coach, and so he's struggling with that. And I was wondering whether it would be appropriate or not for me to volunteer to be a client of his.
What are the potential challenges with that?
Well, like you said, sometimes it may affect how the coaching client relationship evolves. It's hard to know, I guess, whether, like, I'm just wondering whether you would see that as maybe something I shouldn't be his client or not.
Definitely not simultaneously. But if you finish your coaching relationship with him, as you completed the sessions with him, and it feels okay to you to be in that other position, I think that there's no ethical conflict in that.
Okay, thanks.
Welcome. Yes. So he would be opening up to you regarding his traumas, yes? You would be doing GTR with him.
Yes, but this is the first man I've worked with, and he's had a lot of trauma in his life, and the basic recipe worked quite well, except he couldn't come up with a situation. So we worked on tightness in his chest instead, and he did find the score went down, but he's having a hard time I think getting in touch with his body and his the trauma in his body. He successfully lost like 80 pounds and feels that he can help other people, but he has a lot of childhood trauma and trauma from being in the Marines. He was over in somewhere. So I'm not sure. And then I wondered if I should have switched to the emotional release recipe when we couldn't come up with an event. Like one of the things I thought that because I
Sorry,
didn't
Maureen,
have,
can I just stop you just for a second? I'll answer your first question, and then if you have questions about what to do with the protocols, we can go back to that. So first of all, I'm really glad that you're working with a man. It's definitely a good experience, and you keep working with him. So that's wonderful. It also sounds, just from the way you described him, that he might need more sessions than just 3. So this sounds like a more long-term client. And at the same time, from the way you spoke about you personally being coached, it felt like you really want to coach now, sooner rather than later.
sorry,
For yourself, that you were wondering if you should be coached by him. So if you feel for yourself that maybe you'd like a coach kind of now, maybe keep it separate from him, and for now just focus on him. This sounds like he will need more time. So that's what I was trying to say. If you feel like you could use a coach, then maybe start looking elsewhere, and perhaps you can come back to him once you're done, like we said.
yeah, I mean, mine was just to lose weight. So it wasn't to deal with anything personal other than the weight loss. But yeah, I understand what you're saying. But I feel that just the way I was before I was trauma informed, we're not aware that the degree that trauma affects our bodies.
Yes.
And so you're almost in denial. Like it's really hard to get in that space until you practice it. So yeah, I'm like, yeah, he would be and then I'm not sure he's going to be open, even though he had good results with the basic recipe. You get a sense sometimes that some people he just wants help with getting more clients and moving on, and he that maybe isn't committed to dealing with his trauma, or doesn't want to, is not open to. So I'm not sure if he's going to stay with me or not. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, if there was some sort of a barter situation, then he'll coach you and you'll coach him. That is a possibility. Yes, that the motivation just wasn't enough for him to go deeper. Yes. Okay, I'm coming to Leah, if that's okay, Maureen, if it's everything.
Yes, thanks. That's everything. Thank you.
Okay, you're most welcome. Oh, sorry, Leah, I think I muted you again. You were already unmuted. Go. Yes.
So I'll comment on the sharing thing
Mhm.
because it can be a slippery slope.
Yeah.
And then I will also comment on my self-care routine as well. So, most of you, I think, if not all of you, know I've been had a private practice in helping people, counseling and coaching for a long time. And when I was and Isabella, you'll relate to this, I'm sure, clinically trained, it was like, you don't ever say anything personal, zip, no, no matter how much it might actually help the person. Or so I learned, that's why I said it's a fine line, right? So I learned to really take my cues from the client. And most people do relate, like when you say, let's say I'm talking to somebody who has had a death, someone, a close loved one. And I don't go into a lot of details necessarily unless I feel like they want to hear more. So I just watch them. And so if I say I, can empathize how difficult it is, to have had a loved one pass away. My father passed away very tragically, and he was young, he was only 64. And I might talk about just some of the things that I went through and then the solution. So for me, it's always with the intention of showing them that there is a way out of their pain. Here are some options. Here are some things that worked for me. So I think it's really important to, well, number one, I often will ask permission. Is it okay if I share a personal story? Because I have had it happen that when I shared something that I thought was a pretty innocent share, it was triggering. And if somebody is in, as we all know here, if somebody's in deep trauma and you don't know kind of at what place they're at in their healing, a simple thing, you know, what seems simple to us could be very triggering for them. And I've only ever once had a client say, I would appreciate it if you didn't share. And I, of course, respected that. And more often than not, it's if they say something like you said, Isabella, they ask the question and it's, you know, have you ever been through something like this? Or, you know, what did you do that helped you? So I think it's just really important to read the client on that, you know. Yeah.
Absolutely. And before you share about your self-care, a couple of comments to what you said. Yes. So you come from the world of therapy, and of course, coaching is kind of sort of like therapy, but not quite. And because the coaching got so, I think, mingled with a certain lifestyle, you know, it started, these business and profit and these commercial aspects started to bleed into the work, which also meant social media. And social media is oftentimes about not just sharing, sometimes oversharing. So there is, in many of the coaches you will see on social media, this culture of, you know, everything about them. You know, you've seen their bedroom, you know, what they're having for breakfast and what's going on in their marriage and what they're eating and everything. And so it might leave you wondering, what is the appropriate amount? Am I not being honest because I'm not sharing? Or am I crossing boundaries? So just what you said, the cues, absolutely, and asking for permission. That's a wonderful rule to keep in mind. Yes.
Thank you. On the self-care front,
Yes.
it's
Yes.
never been better. I finally, you know, I've been saying for years, you probably, some of you have heard me say it, I'm going to put myself first. You know, my self-care is number one. And I would start and then fall into old patterns of putting other people before me at times, right? So it's gotten better and better. Now, I think I can safely say I am really, truly putting myself first. As a matter of fact, my daughter, we have Thermea Spa here, which is a Scandinavian type spa, or it's a Nordic spa, that opened last year, and it's really close to me. It's only like 10-15 minutes, and it's fairly reasonably priced, in my opinion, because I can stay there all day and use the waters. And so I've started going. It's almost like once a month now. So my daughter called while I was at lunch, and I often go with other people. And we were at lunch. So anyway, and I said, oh, I'll call you back. I'm at Thermea Spa. And she goes, of course you are. You must live there now. I laughed because before I would have the little voice going, oh, am I doing this too much? Is it, you know, what do people think? And now it's like, yeah. So I just said, yep, that's my goal. So in addition to that, so I really formulated a plan. And what helped me too was I recently heard the best financial advice I've ever heard in my life. And one of the components of this financial plan is guilt-free spending. Now, who has ever heard that? Guilt-free spending. It's like, you know, because then people think, oh, you're just going to go crazy. But it's literally, it's intentional, and it's based on the things that are important to you and fun for you, and right. And here's what I discovered. A lot of the things on my, you know, what I enjoy and what I love to do are free. So then I literally plugged in numbers, and I was shocked at how much I actually had for guilt-free spending, right? And so I was like, I could definitely do a spa once and I'm talking, when I say spa, I mean like a whole day. And then I, you know, do other spa treatments throughout, but, you know, do a massage once a month, or so I've started just booking things like crazy for me within my plan. And I'm going on a yoga retreat for 2.5 days. with a friend at this amazing place, not too far. Well, it's about 2.5 hour drive from here. But I really, and then every day. And then, so for me, the plan really included, okay, so there's the big things, you know, yoga retreat, spa day kind of thing. And then every day, what can I do? And I literally, and here's the interesting thing. So the more I started doing it and setting boundaries, and I think I mentioned here, I only see clients on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday now. And express this to clients, and I've had so many say, thank you. That is, I'm so happy that you are actually following through with this and modeling, because I need to do more of that. And also, and every single client that I've told I'm taking the summer off, I've mentioned that. Yes, I'm taking the entire summer off. Well, July and August, have said, good for you. Every single one. So I'm like, okay. Now, the interesting part is I have had so many new clients come along. Like, I'm like, so it's almost kind of like, as I'm fine tuning and putting myself first, I don't know what it is, the universe is picking up on it, or my energy is different. More and more people are actually coming to me. So I don't know what that's all about, but I have never felt better. I am sleeping amazingly well. I have identified that for me, in addition to some other food sensitivities, is meat is just a big no-no for me. It really causes a lot of inflammation. So I don't know if we have vegetarians or vegans on here, but I am moving towards not a full vegan, but probably, I think more of a pescatarian. I will probably continue to have fish. That's Kathy, yeah. That's kind of where I'm moving, and I'm feeling better and better all the time. So that's my
That's
self-care.
so good to hear, Leah. And you look so rested and rejuvenated, and your life
Thank you.
force is back and your joy for life. Thank you for sharing that and being an
Yes.
inspiration.
Thanks
too.
for that point, because that was what was missing for so long for me, was that joy for life. And I think, you know, in great part to a lot of the healing that I've been doing, great thanks to GTR. And then just really, you know, and asking yourself, what does bring me joy? What brings me joy? And that's really what I did. And with the plan, and, you know, it's like, well, these are the things that bring me joy. And how can I start incorporating that every day? You know, that's the
Yes.
key.
And since you like the joy for life, yeah. So what I see when I look at you is this burden that you used to carry on your shoulders is no longer there, and
Yeah.
instead there's more lightness to your being. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Sylvana, I'm coming to you. I'll just comment a little bit. So the reason why I wanted to open this conversation again about self-care is that I was hoping that you had some time in between talking about self-care back in winter and now, and perhaps you experimented with some of your self-care routine and found that some of them were working, you're trying something else. And I do want to highlight the point that it's not an all or nothing. So the fact that you didn't stick to your plan, that you would, have a massage every day, doesn't mean that self-care is not for you or you're bad at this. It really takes some building of habits. I'm putting together a little lecture that is a compilation of our conversations back from winter about the Deep Care Playbook. And there are so many wonderful sharings that you all had. You understood it so well, the self-care, how it's needed and how to do it. So, but we do have to be reminded of ourselves. And your last sharing is there going to be where you say exactly this, that you always keep reminding yourself, not just where you're going and where you're at, but how much you have already accomplished, the progress you have made, the steps that you managed to take. So this can change for you. I too originally planned, okay, a massage every week, but then I realized that it's not quite doable for me. I'm okay if it's once per month or 2 times per month, but my priority has become really good sleep. So being in bed by 11 p.m. And that has made a huge shift, and that I'm sticking to that. And I'm really feeling so good and I don't need the massage every week. Perhaps that will come, but I'm also not beating myself up for it. So let me go to you, Silvana, and see what you wanted to share. And I'll be looking out for some other hands up if you'd like. Hello.
Hello, Isabella.
Hi.
I'd actually like to ask you if you could elaborate on transference. I had a situation with a coach, and that actually happened to me. And it was actually, I felt it in my body. I got really upset and angry, but I didn't really understand what happened until later on. I went to another coach, and the coach told me that there was transference of certain emotions, and just not to go into a lot of detail about it, it just felt icky. And
Yes.
it felt so icky, and I didn't like it, and I didn't know how to deal with it, so I didn't until later. Someone pointed it out, but I still didn't deal with it. So just if you can talk a little bit about it.
As in what it is and how it can show up. Yes. Is that what you
Yeah,
mean?
exactly.
Okay.
Please.
Okay, so I'll give you a little bit of the historical background too, but in very simplistic terms, it's like, say you're talking to your husband, and all of a sudden he starts telling you how you think, and he's sure that this is what you meant, and this is why you behaved the way you behaved, and you're looking at him like, I'm not your mother. I think you're mistaking me for your mother. And that's what transference is really. When somebody is projecting onto you
Okay.
how they feel about either somebody else
Yes.
or about a part of them. So
Yes.
historically, this goes actually back to Freudian times in the talk therapy that Freud initiated. It was actually desired. The goal was to achieve that the client does transfer some of the feelings towards the other person that they had a conflict with onto the therapist so that it would be brought to the surface and dealt with. Now that tends to be a no-no in many other therapies. It does happen, and they're taught what to do with that, but usually the goal is not to get to that situation, because then the dynamic changes and trust can be lost, etc.
Right. However, it was the coach that transferred onto me, and I was the client.
Yes, that can happen too. Yes,
And that's
called
exactly what
counter
happened.
transference. It's
Yes,
called
that's the
counter-transference.
word. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, it can happen, and that's why we are encouraged to do the inner work on ourselves first, so that
Yes.
we don't end up projecting on the client.
And how would you perhaps give me a scenario, if you don't mind, how you could have handled it once you know? Now I know. I didn't even know what counter transfer was until it happened. How would you deal with that?
As a client or as a coach?
As a
When it
client.
happens.
As
Yes,
a
okay.
client.
So first of all, somebody who is trained, that should never happen. You know,
Right.
when you were learning about the map of empowerment, I think the word neutrality, that is a place to be when you're working with somebody where you either have resolved your issues or at the very least are able to put them on side when working with somebody. And it is our ethical obligation to always check that we don't project. And that's the reason why we, for example, ask open-ended questions, or why we don't want to ask leading questions. So for example, aren't you exaggerating? Oh, that already implies that the coach thinks that you are exaggerating.
Yeah.
Instead, you want to ask, how do you feel about that?
Yeah.
You know, that sort of thing. So it should not be your obligation to catch that your coach is
Right.
projecting their stuff onto you.
Yeah.
However, if that happens, just as in any other relationship, you can just say that you don't agree with what they're saying, that you feel differently about that. You know, that just the word of, I think you're projecting onto me tends to be a bit provocative, although in your situation, you have the full right to voice it, and not just the right, but why would you want to be in a relationship where you don't feel safe?
Right. Well, I didn't coach with this individual ever after
Yeah.
that. And this was
Yeah.
maybe 10 years ago. So I'm in a different place now, but I just since you mentioned it, I thought I'd ask you to elaborate and just get a deeper
And,
understanding of
and
it.
that's one of the reasons why, again, sharing those personal stories, it has those downsides. And sometimes if you do that, it can, as a coach, perhaps bring you to a place where it revives something in you. It just stirs something in you that is personal because there's something left unprocessed. And that's just a strategy for those who really, there's not too much that is left unprocessed. So yeah, that must have been a difficult situation for you.
Oh, yeah. It was very upsetting because I didn't know back then what I know now. And I knew it was icky, and I knew that it was like that person was lashing out, and I was,
Yeah.
really confused. Like, why is this happening? I'm
And
paying
it
a
can
lot of
happen
money.
in so many ways. Now, most of you have been in Sweden. For those of you who weren't, I'll explain. So in the coaching school where I taught before in GTR, we taught this concept of there's woman energy, mother energy, and daughter energy. And I cannot tell you how many times I was critiquing somebody's calls, and the coach was saying to the client, I think you're in daughter energy. And so it was just very confrontational. So what could have happened instead was you would explain the concepts to the client, and then perhaps ask open-endedly, where do you think you resonate the most? Which of those archetypes speaks to you the most?
Yeah,
And you don't corner them that way. You don't,
exactly.
yeah.
Yes, that's great. Thanks, Isabel. I appreciate it.
Yes, that's a very good question. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Yanina, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you. I just have one brief thought or addition about the sharing, because it's something that I started doing when I share something personal. Is that I start with a sentence, something like, I'm not saying it's exactly the same for you as it was for me, but what I experienced is, or what happened to me is. And the reason I'm doing that is that a few years ago, I worked with a coach, and objectively speaking, there were quite a lot of similarities in her story as in mine. And the way she approached it was like, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. My father was the same. But she did that in so often. And in that moment, I remember feeling like, just because there were a few factors that are the same doesn't mean you 100% understand how I feel. I felt like she's not really trying to understand how I feel, but projected a lot. So that it didn't make me feel good, to be honest. So yeah, I started whenever I felt that sharing some of my own experiences might be beneficial right now. I like to start with something like, I'm not saying that this is exactly the same that happened to you, or I'm not saying that this is exactly how you feel, but what I went through is, and how it made me feel is, does it feel similar to you, or can you resonate or relate to that somehow? So yeah, I just thought that would be nice, because I personally don't like feeling that my coach is assuming to know how exactly my experience was.
Yes, yes.
I didn't like that at all.
Yes, I have a lecture in store. It's probably going in the graduate club, not in the main training, but it's called How Not to Invalidate Your Client. And this is one of the ways, absolutely. And another strategy to perhaps help the client feel normalized in their experience would be if you had enough clients, for example, and you've had cases where they had just the same experience as this one client, you can say, you know what, I've worked with several clients who went through something similar as you. You don't always have to just say that, me too, sort of situation. So there's that. And speaking of projection, also what you, Silvana, started on saying, and partly you, Janina, is so I remember that there was once a student in the other school where I worked who her son unfortunately died. When he died, he was a young adult, he was a man. And naturally, it still is a cause of a huge grief for her. I think she even started some kind of group. I don't know if it was on Facebook or a circle, but it became a mission of hers in a good way to support parents who have lost their children. And once she sent a very angry email, I think it was to me, but it was about another teacher at the school. I don't know what that teacher said. I don't remember the details, but the students was shocked how she talked about somebody losing their child through either abortion or stillbirth. I don't remember, but in that angry email, it was how parents are always devastated by that experience and it changes their life completely, etc. And I had to write back to her to say that this is her experience and that in working with others, it would be beneficial for them if she did not assume this about everybody. Because there are women who've had an abortion and they're not scarred for life because of that. They even consider it a good choice. It doesn't, it's not a weight on their heart. They're happy that they have the option. It was not the time or it was not the man. Uh, I know a lot of women and parents where there was stillbirth and they had children after that, and it was tragic, but it's not the same kind of experience as this student had. So, speaking of projecting and transference, this was such a big deal also because through her filter, she would have cornered a client like that. Perhaps a client would have shared that they had an abortion or stillbirth, and she would have assumed a lot of things of how that was huge for them and it was affected their whole life, and it might not have necessarily been the case for them. Hopefully that makes sense. Taryn, I'm coming to you, and then Kathy. Thank you, Anina.
I feel like every time I'm here, I'm learning a bunch of new stuff. I have 2 pages of notes based on all that you guys have said so far. But I wanted to share a little bit about this whole idea. I feel like I've learned a lot about storytelling. I'm a storyteller by trade. It's just who I am. I know that's who I am. And I've learned over years and days and at work and at home and just everywhere in my life that telling the story isn't always the best answer. It's not the right thing. And a lot of things that you guys said here, number one is, if I think it helps a person to justify or to understand how they're feeling when you can share, when you've been there and you say, this is what happened to me. Anyway, I wanted to share a story. Yesterday, a girlfriend of mine, she's older than me and she's dating a younger man, and they've been dating for like 20 years now. And he died on Good Friday. He's 40 years old. And she's a mess, just a total mess. They weren't living together. But they had a really, really tight relationship. And she asked me to pick her up from the airport yesterday. And I was driving to the airport and I knew she was going to be emotional all the way home, and because she didn't want to go there alone, because he always used to pick her up and so on and so forth. And so we're driving home and she goes, how do you get over this? How do you stop crying? How do you stop doing this? How do you stop feeling this? And I looked at her and all I could say to her, and I thought about it on my ride down there, was that I can't answer that for you. I said, yes, my husband died, but I came at it from a different place. I was much more independent. My husband, there's a lot of things he didn't want to do and he couldn't do then when he got sick. And so I had built this independence, and she was so connected to this man. Like, they did everything together. They spent every evening together. They went out and traveled. They didn't travel everywhere together, but she was with him constantly, and he was filling her up. And I was filled. I was mostly filled up, but getting filled up more and more and more on my own. And so I couldn't answer that for her, but I was able to share my part of the story of what happened to me to help her see how it was different for her, so that she could start thinking about how she's feeling and how she's being affected by it. So I think it's kind of and I think Leah said, it can be a slippery slope, but if we're always looking at how we can get the person to speak to their pain or to talk to their troubles, then that's a good story. if we're telling the story to tell our story, and I find that even at work, you go into a meeting and somebody's so excited about something they're doing and they want to share it. And then you had this great thing that happened to you and you want to tell them so that they'll do theirs better, or they'll see how great yours was. And that's where you're really taking it from a more personal place. And so I think that's kind of a way to ask yourself, how is this going to help them see their own pain in their own way, and know at the same time that you're supporting them, not just because it happened to you, but because you understand pain, you understand trauma, you understand those feelings because you've been there. That's kind of the story part, I think.
Absolutely. That's a wonderful sharing, Taryn. And of course, we all have different personalities. You are not just a storyteller, you are very comfortable sharing your life with others. That's part of who you are. And if that is not your personality, somebody else's personality, that doesn't have to be your way of doing not just the sessions, but
Right.
also marketing. So it's sometimes in the future, we're talking with Janina that we will run a workshop for you called How to Fall in Love with Social Media Marketing, because part of what makes it perhaps intimidating for some of you is this: I have to share the intimate parts of my life with everybody, and that's not what it has to be unless you choose to do it that way. There are many ways to do social media to connect with your clients and share a story, but that story doesn't necessarily have to be your story. Okay, Kathy. Hello.
Hello, ladies. I love this call. I'm so happy I'm here. So, first of all, how do I share with my story or my experience with the client? It's always as a bridge. It's always to bridge. So, as a coach, the way I look at it is it is their hour and a half. I'm observing, I am the witness to their story, to their experience. I am validating them. And when I have the opportunity, when I can see that, okay, maybe there's a moment where I can share my experience, I'll ask, is it okay if I share? Or I'll bring it in gently, but it's open-ended. It does not become about me. It's how it's helping that client in that moment. And I have to bring up something from way back when you critiqued a call for me at SWAT. And this was a beautiful lesson you gave me, and I never forgot it. I never forgot it. And you did it so beautifully. So I was working with this client, and she was always dating married men. And, and she wanted to meet someone so she could have, meet someone and build a life. And I remember one of the calls I sent, we went through certain things, and I said to her, oh, maybe you'll meet a single man. Well, you got me on that one. I don't know if you remember. And I never forgot it. I never forgot it, because even though I said it in a like, oh, maybe we can, you'll meet a single man. You told me, but maybe what if she doesn't want to? What if just being with a married man? And that lesson, that was a huge lesson to me, because it's like, oh my goodness, my job is just to witness, to be the guide, to show them, give them the tools, but I can't, so even though it was so sincere, but what you said to me was monumental. So where am I going with this? It is everything that we share, like as coaches, should be a bridge. I don't like the word should, could be a bridge, and every client is different. So, if abuse comes up, well, I'm very familiar with that. Being in an abusive relationship or having a domineering parent, I'm very, very familiar with that. So I can bring it up in a gentle way. So that's how I bridge with my clients. And the other thing, it's so important to hold space and validate them. It's just so important. So how do I practice self-care? Every day I've been practicing one question. Kathy, what do you need today? What do you need today? And that's it. Whatever it is, it's just, Kathy, what do you need today? And sometimes I'll say, sweetheart, what do you need today? And that's it.
It's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah,
Simple.
simple and practical. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kathy. By the way, if somebody else would like to share, please put your hand up because we're almost at the top of the hour. Janina, I see you. Just a comment there. Yes, and Mary Elizabeth. So what Kathy mentioned there, and I'm so glad that you remembered it. Of course, your intention was the purest one when you said that to the client. But there are just so many ways that a person can feel invalidated, even if you meant so well. So it could have been, is she judging me because I should be dating single man? Or am I doing something wrong? Was it a mistake to share? So all of that, thank you. And of course, he didn't mean any of that. When it also comes to sharing personal stories, and even your path in life. Sometimes clients come to us because perhaps we did share parts of our story on our website, on social media, and they would like to replicate or emulate that success, and that drew them to ourselves. And they look up to us. And sometimes it can feel like, yes, I'll use my personal story so that the client knows that they can have what I have, they can build what I have built. And that can sometimes also backfire, even if you don't actually verbalize it. I remember I had in all my coaching years, there were 2 clients where the things were not left the way I would have preferred, and where things changed all of a sudden. And in both of those cases, there was this projection, this transference taking place, not so much of them comparing me to somebody else in their life, but perhaps to a version of themselves where they would like to be. And that contrast was very difficult for them. These were both women who were at the time approximately at the same age as I was. There was the history of, they were both from the ex-communist countries, so the way we grew up and the conditions and the opportunities we had were more or less the same. And even though initially it was a good common place to start the relationship from, over time, it just created conflict in them, and perhaps them feeling like they were not moving as fast, or maybe they should have been somewhere else, etc. So it really is a thing, this transference, and personal stories can sometimes help it, sometimes they can undermine your effort to actually help the client. All right, Janina, go ahead.
Yeah. Also about self-care. I love what Kathy said about the question, what do I need today? I have something similar, but slightly different. I stole it from my yoga teacher. In our yoga session, what she likes to say is, move your body as if you loved your body. Feel your body, move your body, and if you feel like you're not loving yourself yet, that's okay. Move as if you would love your body. And this, for me, it's just, I noticed how I start to move differently. So what I started doing is realizing that, like, self-care, caring about myself, that's ultimately what it is, caring about myself. So what I like doing is throughout the day is, how would I do this if I cared about myself? How would I eat? What would I eat if I cared about myself? How much would I sleep if I cared about myself? I like it because for me, it gives this spaciousness, as in, if I would care about myself, how would I do it? It feels, to me, it feels more open. I feel more freedom, and I don't feel this restriction of, you need to sleep 8 hours to be healthy, and you have to do it this way, and that's self-care. But I always like this underlying, how would I do it if? It's like this what if alternatives kind of, it gives this space. So that's something I like to do, especially when I have days where, a lot is going on and I feel like I'm entering this autopilot mode. And okay, what would I do if I cared about myself right now? And that's just, yeah. For example, I told a few times, mentioned that an early bird normally, and up until not long ago, it really was, I woke up immediately out of the bed, starting my day. And now I'm like, I'm waking up, I'm like, would I give myself a little bit more time if I cared? Yes. And I just 10-15 minutes stay in bed, take my time to wake up. I'm not really doing anything. I'm just starting to wake up slowly. Well, now I have some little cuddle time with my little baby here. But it's really, so this worked for me. Yeah, I was thinking about that when Kathy mentioned that, like, how would I do it? And what would I do if I cared about myself?
Thank you, Janina. And that's such a wonderful way. If you don't have a more exact plan for your self-care, that's a great way to start self-care every day. And several times we have come to the topic of how words are important. I know Taryn mentioned sometimes that she doesn't like the word discipline, or the routine word was not the most popular. And you can make the words and these questions into ones that speak to you. So for Kathy, it was, what do you need today, Kathy? For Janina, it was, how can I care for you today? Perhaps for some of you is, how can I be kind to you today? How can I show you that you matter today? Find the words that resonate with you, and that you will give yourself a better success chance of taking good care of yourself. Lucy, I'm coming to you, and then Mary Elizabeth, I don't know if you wanted to speak, your hand is not up, but if you do, yeah, okay, I'll go to you after Lucy.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear
Hi.
me? Because I know my internet's been cutting in and out.
All good.
I wanted to share that there have been times when I would ask, I'll just say in a conversation, if somebody's sharing something with me, and I get the sense if they're even wondering if I can relate to them. So I will actually ask, like, do you feel that I can relate to what you're experiencing? If they feel that their experience is so bizarre or so out of the ordinary for them, how do they know that I can even relate? And I will ask, would you like me to share something of my own life so that you get a sense that I can relate to what
Absolutely.
you are experiencing?
That's
So
one way of asking for permission, and a very beautiful way.
Precisely. Exactly. And yet, it's not an abrupt way. It's like a softening of, would you like to know that I've had a similar experience without wanting to share details, but that I can, that there is that empathy, and empathy doesn't have to come from having a similar experience. It can potentially deepen the connection in that they feel, oh, okay, am I being heard? And do they understand? And, am I not feeling bizarre if somebody else actually has had something that is in that realm, is similar? Again, it becomes about, for me, that the other person feels that I can relate to what they're experiencing. Not that I have to have experienced it myself, but I mean, there's a myriad of events that can happen in our lives where there are similar context or content, even if it's not exactly the same event, that then can become relatable. So
Yes, thank you so very much. I love that question. And also a variation of that is, would it help you to know that I went through a similar situation myself? That's a beautiful way of making sure that the client is comfortable, and that we will support them through sharing. Yes. I remember one time I was critiquing a session between a coach and a client, and they were doing GTR. And the coach, coming from this environment of learning coaching and these circles where we're kind of used to sharing even personal experiences with each other, she had the best of intentions, thinking that that would help her client as well. And so there were many occasions when she did that in light of wanting to help the client to feel okay with what she was going through. I think there was divorce, and there were children, and there was infidelity, different kinds of things making the relationship complicated. And the client was getting more and more frustrated with every sharing that the coach did. And in the end, I think the client even sent me an email saying the coach just kept talking about herself. So there's the reading the cues. So if the
Oh.
client is getting more frustrated and not settled and calmed with the sharing, then that's not a good strategy. Lucy, go ahead.
Yeah, so on what you're saying, to me, that's about WTMI, way too much information. If a client is coming in overwhelmed, if they're already in overwhelm, I'm really checking myself. They don't necessarily need more of my story. They need more listening, even a more in-depth of physical cues, like acknowledgement with a nodding of the head, or I hear you. Do you feel heard? So that it's truly about them feeling the safety and trust to continue to share what for them is their overwhelm, without adding other information that may just really create more confusion for them.
And overwhelm was just the right word in that session. And of course, the differences between clients are so individual. I am 100% sure that with another client, that would have been just the approach. For this one, she shared one thing, the divorce. The coach said, yes, I've been in an abusive relationship myself. And then, you know, every sharing of the client was countered by the sharing of the coach. And it almost in the end created a pile of catastrophes happening on both ends. So, you know, the client had something happen with the flat. I don't know if it flooded or something. And the coach said, well, my apartment burned down. And so it was, okay, I can understand why there was overwhelm. So yes, overwhelm is one of those signs that you want to expect and not continue. Thank you, Lucy. Mary Elizabeth, go ahead.
I just wanted to thank everyone for the sharing. I found it very helpful. And, you know, this self-care for me has been really difficult. So I'm making baby steps. And one of the issues I'm dealing with is I'm putting in boundaries where I've established, or I'm trying to establish, that people can't just show up here and expect that I'm going to be available. So I'm getting resistance from a couple of friends who are now blaming me and saying, well, you're always busy and you don't have time for us. And so I feel like I get into a position of trying to defend myself, which I don't want to do. So I'm just kind of looking, that's one thing, looking for a response that I can make that's appropriate. And then the other thing is, I really appreciated the comments about Janina, what you were making, like if you no, I think it was you, if you cared about yourself, or maybe what's that, Kathy? No, Kathy said
Janina, if you cared about yourself.
Janina. And so what I've been saying to myself is this a good choice or a bad choice for you? But actually, I mean, it is a good way for me to sort of start isolating things, but underneath it, there's a blame there if I'm saying if it's good or a bad choice. So I really appreciated hearing if you cared about yourself. I suppose you could find blame in that as well. But one of my issues is the blame that I've experienced in my life, and I'm trying to relieve myself of that blame.
Can
So
I ask
that's a big issue for me.
If you don't mind, Mary Elizabeth, I will just briefly answer because we're at the top of the hour. If you would like to talk more about that, we can take it into another call. But
Okay.
I would love to invite you to perhaps ask that question in a variation that would work for you. There are certain people, and I think you belong in that category, that might have an easier time to find self-compassion when you consider things from the perspective of someone you love. So if it was one of your children or a dear friend that you love, and they were in that same situation, if you cared about them, what would you advise? What would you suggest? If you find it hard to look at yourself through these questions with self-compassion, then look through the eyes of someone you love.
Okay, thank you.
And please feel free to bring it up again next time we talk. I just didn't want to cut things short because it might need a deeper conversation.
Okay.
I hope that's all right with you. All right, ladies. So I'm going to wrap up for today. Thank you very much for coming. I'm repeating, next week we have the SOAS Wellbeing Workshop, and we will inform you as to what to bring. There's not much, but you will find the information on Facebook. And I always tag you with the @everyone, so hopefully you're all getting the notifications of the workshop. Thank you very much. Bye for now.